Hi, third graders. It's time to review what we learned in Investigation 4. I'm going to start by having us look at what we did in class yesterday or what you did at home yesterday. The first thing you needed to do was write those prime factorizations of 72 and 120 and find the longest string that was common to both. So they wanted you to tell them what was the string you could come up with so that you could have everything they both had. So that answer would be 2 by 2 by 2 by 3. That was the number they had, all the numbers they had in common. 120 had an extra 5 and an extra 2, and no, it didn't. It just had an extra 5. 72 had an extra 3. So the ones that they had in common was 2 by 2 by 2 by 3. And if you did that math, you would come up with 24. And 24 is the greatest common factor of 72 and 120. And we know because that's what's included. That's how you do 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. The shortest string of factors that has both 72 and 120 in it. Okay, so this one was a little bit more difficult. Anna and I talked about this one on Google Meet today. So you had to know first that you had 2 by 2 by 2 by 3 by 3 with 72. And then you had to look at 120, which was 2 by 2 by 2. Oh, this is what 2 by 2 by 2 by 3. I have trouble when I accidentally make a mistake there. Let's try it again. By 3 by 5. Okay, so now I'm going to switch my color. And I'm going to go in here to the pencil. And what we're looking for now is the shortest string that would include both the prime factorizations. So essentially, because they both have 2 by 2 by 2 by 3, right? Can you see how they both have that included in them? We're going to need 2 by 2 by 2 by 3, right? What do they each still have? This one still has another 3 and this one has another 5. So you would have to include, oh, that's a little too high, another 3 and another 5. So the answer would be 2 by 2 by 2 by 3 by 3 by 5. And that would be equal to 360. And that would be the least common multiple. Can you find a greatest common multiple of 72 and 120? No. Why not? Because numbers go on forever. This next part was asking you to look at the idea of relatively prime. So 25 and 12 are relatively prime. We could tell because they only had 1 as a common factor. Find another pair of relatively prime numbers. So in C, they said 16 and 9. You could say 12 and 13. You could say 4 and 15. You could not say 2 even numbers because they would definitely have an additional common factor. Their additional common factor would be 2. Find 2 pairs of numbers whose least common multiple is the product of the 2 numbers, like 5 times 6 is 30. Their example was 5 and 4, 8 and 63. Find 2 pairs of numbers whose least common multiple is less than the product. So they did 6 times 8 is 48, but the least common multiple of 6 and 8 is 24. That's because 6 and 8 also have other common numbers, right? 5 and 6 would be considered relatively prime. 6 and 8 would have another common factor. So they gave the examples of 8 and 40 or 10 and 15. So whenever those numbers have another common factor in common. How can you tell from the prime factorizations whether the least common multiple of the 2 numbers is less than the product, explain. You can tell if they have another factor in common or if they are both prime or both relatively prime. In question E, does this work for any two numbers? This works for any two numbers, and you can prove it with the prime factorization. Okay, so we are going to move on to what we learned in investigation 4. So these are the things we learned. We learned factor strings and factorization, meaning you can find factor strings for numbers using breaking down the factor pairs. We learned how to make prime factorization, find prime factorization by making factor trees. You learned how to find the greatest common factor with prime factorization, how to find the least common multiple with prime factorization, and you learned what relatively prime is. If any of this stuff is stuff that still you have questions on, please reach out and let me know. Otherwise, I'll show you at the end of the video how to find other videos that will explain it more. So today in class or for your work, you will be doing the additional practice. You need to complete the work to the best of your ability. Remember the mazes, the good thing was to try to find the prime factorization, and then it would help you. You may use your calculator on these. These are pretty big numbers, so I think that's fair. Then we have problems 3, 4, 5, and 6. You might want to look back at your work when you're doing number 6. What pairs? Name a pair of numbers whose greatest common factor is the same as one of the numbers. That's what we just talked about in the homework from yesterday or in the classwork from yesterday. Again, if the numbers are big, you may use a calculator or maybe try it and then check your work with a calculator. And let's see, the next page is 7. Are they relatively prime? What does relatively prime mean again? They only have 1 as a common factor. And that's all you have for the review. So let me go over back to our course. I'm inside the Primetime folder, inside Investigation 4. If you click inside that Investigation 4 review folder, you will see here is that document I was just showing you. If you want to print it out, you could do that. It has a print button, a download button. So if you wanted to print it at home and write it on that, you could do that. I also put in this folder the IXL. All of the IXL links from this whole investigation are listed here. There's 2 extras at the bottom. And if there were any that you didn't do, you could work on those. We also had, oh, I clicked too far out. There was one more thing, a skills page. And that skills page would be that would be an extra additional thing if you want to practice. You do not have to do this. This is loading. It takes a while. And again, you can print this. It's just another worksheet that would be practicing prime factorization and finding LCM and GCF. So I hope that explains what you need to do here today on Friday for the review. On Monday, we will start talking about the unit review. Have a great weekend.